Roger Williams University is hosting a crisis management seminar on May 3rd at their Providence campus. Crises, whether a natural disaster, cyber attack, or financial instability, can have severe repercussions if not handled properly. This is where crisis management plays a pivotal role. Join Roger Williams MBA students and expert speakers to learn how to prepare for the unexpected. The program is totally free and open to the public. You can register online at rwu.edu/events/crisis-management-symposium.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Well, good evening, good morning, whenever you're listening. It's about 9:40 at night here on Monday night. And I wanted to hop on to talk about the Exeter forest fire that took place, that began on Friday and went through the weekend, and what I learned from some of my reporting in the field today. I took a trip down to Exeter for a 12:15 p.m. scheduled media gaggle with Governor McKee, who had himself gone on a tour with some people from EMA and DEM, some of the local fire departments, to sort of assess the damage. And I'll back up a second in case you're not familiar with specifically what took place. Last Friday, there was what ended up being the largest forest fire in the history of the state. You know, on Route 2 where the Veterans Cemetery is, it began kind of back there. There's a Nature Conservancy plot. There's a lot of private land back there. And it sort of triangulates along 102, Route 102, which goes, roughly speaking, you can think of it as going from Route 4 to Route 3, kind of a crossroad there. It extends well beyond either of those crossroads, but it kind of gives you a framework for the general region we're talking here. And reports started coming in. We were on the radio on Friday afternoon. We were really trying to make sense of it. And in real time, we're covering this. And different reports coming in from the EMA and the local fire department and the DEM and the governor's office. It really was kind of a chaotic moment from a communication standpoint, to be completely honest, trying to put out the right information over the air. But at the end of the day, largest forest fire in state history, and a lot of questions remain as to the conditions of our forests. Now, let's be clear. The last several days, really the last week plus in our region, from Maine through New York, has been perfect forest fire, brush fire environments. And we saw this take place in Maine. We saw this take place in New York. And in fact, some of those forest fires are believed to have come from sparks by railroads. So today I even asked the governor about that. I'll play some audio for you in a second. If our railways, are basically free and clear of brush, and if there's communication with the various entities that run trains through Rhode Island. But the big idea here is, what are we doing to preserve our forests as climate change continues to adjust the normalcy of the temperature of the environment in earlier parts of the year? I mean, think about the winter that we just had and the fact that it was, 90 degrees in April a couple of days ago. I mean, no matter what your theories are, this is abnormal. I don't remember this ever happening in my life. Do you? I mean, this seems like a completely brand new experience, and it plays a role in situations like forest fires. So anyway, there was this media gaggle today, 12:15, with the governor after he was going to tour and sort of assess the damage. And a lot of the questions were about, the various pieces of equipment the state had and so on and so forth. And look, I asked the governor a handful of questions. I'm going to play some audio right now because it's germane to where our conversation is probably going to go tonight. This is from, again, 12:15 this afternoon.
A couple of systemic questions. There were reports that this began in a campsite out in the woods. Is that accurate? Can you report that it was, in fact, a campsite and that was the origin?
The only thing I can say is that the state fire marshal is investigating that.
That's the Exeter fire chief right there.
That's what they handle.
In the woods right now, in light of the housing crisis, there are definitely people out here camping. Do you have a sort of a count of how many people are out here living in the woods right now? You can see it just from litter that's left out right here in these woods.
I would have no idea on that. I mean, that's just what you see up and down the road. You'd guess if they're camping or not. I mean, I have no idea.
Also, there's been several of these brush fires all throughout the region in New York and Maine, traced, at least as of right now, the reports are it's traced to railways, sparks coming off of railroads. do you have an account of, in this area, obviously it's west of us, pardon me, it's east of us where we're standing right now, but is there communication with Amtrak and any of the other railways that pass through here about, clearing brush away from tracks? Because we've seen that spark some brush fires in Maine and at least in New York as well.
I know in the past we've had that issue, but I don't recall of any major issues. I don't know if North Kingston's had that issue, being that the railroad runs through there, but that's been pretty good around here. But I can't speak for other towns.
Yeah, I don't think there's, is there any are there any train tracks in Exeter? It naturally would be pretty good. Look, the bottom line is that, and I raised this question on Twitter, and I think it's really important to discuss. The housing crisis is forcing people to camp in the woods. This isn't like breaking news, and this isn't something that's brand new either. This has gone on for years, right? But I think it's exacerbated, and the idea isn't to send out some kind of DEM officials on ATVs to hunt down whoever might be camping out there. It's just to have a general understanding of, yeah, there's people in the woods, and if you're camping in a tent, you're probably going to build a fire. And what can we do to sort of get ahead of that potential problem? Broadly speaking, the questions I was asking were leading towards what can we do to prevent or at least limit the impact of future fires, right? So I think that question, I just wanted to put it out there because it's something to consider. It's a very real situation. There are definitely people camping in various woodlands in Rhode Island. And they're not camping because, they went to the LL Bean store and want to have a nice weekend out. People are living there. Some of you who listen to this program have told me that is where you live and that's your lifestyle. And you may not receive all of the red flag warnings and the communications about the very specific danger in a given period of time with forest fires. Now, look, they didn't even admit, even though there's some reports out there. I know Channel 12 was reporting it, that it's believed to have been started by a campfire. They did not conclude that one way or another, but it does appear that this was sparked by a campsite. And, geez, again, could it be just somebody who's out for an adventure and they just happen to set up shop in this area of the nature preserve and things just kind of went south for them in that moment and then they scurried off back to their more comfortable reality? Sure, that's possible. But I'm not going to rule out the fact that there's people who are camping in the woods right now, building fires, who are victims of the housing crisis. So I don't know how to resolve that in a humane way without crossing into the notion of, okay, well, we need to identify where everybody is so we can evict them, essentially. But inform, perhaps. And again, this is me just jumping to conclusions. But if you look at some of the litter, the types of litter that you find throughout various portions of our state in the woods, folks, it's not just some underpass in Pawtucket. It's not the random abandoned lot in Providence where people have homeless encampments. I can guarantee you that. Common sense, and again, some of you out there have told me this. And there's a lot of different ways we can react to that, and it's something I think very important to consider. So that was the governor's media gaggle, again, in Exeter, kind of on the where the fire department training facility is, ironically. That general area. Zinnia Health's out there. Exeter Job Corps is out there. It's just out in the woods off of Route 2. So after the gaggle, I was really, really interested in seeing some of the impacted area because where this press gaggle was relatively nowhere near where there were actual burns. And I wanted to learn more about the fire. I wanted to learn more about the response. I wanted to learn more about what actually took place that day. So I linked up with Representative Megan Cotter, the rep in that area, who was excellent on Friday on the radio, providing us with some updates from her perspective, some constituent service work that she was doing, servicing the fire department with food and water, and generally interested in this. Obviously, it's her, it's her district. So I linked up with her and I said, is there any way that I can get in I can just peek in. I just want to see what it looks like. I want to feel it. I mean, some of you guys know I love the woods. I'm not, my side of the mountain here. I'm not making acorn pancakes. All right, that aforementioned LL Bean store, it's not my first stop on a weekend. But I hike a lot, and I grew up in those woods. My friends, the turkeys, everything. I grew up out there. So I was really concerned and interested in seeing it, and I wanted to report on things from a firsthand perspective, if possible. Not just the press gaggle, which was mostly correctly so, just praising the incredible effort by the fire departments, dozens of fire departments that responded, the National Guard, using Black Hawk helicopters to dip buckets into the water at Exeter Country Club to suppress the fire. So anyway, Rep Cotter said, let me see what I can do. So she introduced me to Scott Cattell, who's the fire chief in North Kingstown, who was heavily involved in the suppression effort of this forest fire. Also has decades of experience on Exeter, which is a volunteer fire department. Remember, Exeter, volunteer fire department, no police force, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? It's as quote-unquote off the grid as I guess. Maybe not. That may not be the right way to put it. But it's people love the taxation scenario there. But the turnaround on that, the consequence, I guess, is volunteer fire department and no police force. Some people would love that. But in an emergency situation, it becomes obvious why that could be a problem, right? So Chief Cattell, North Kingstown, also heavily involved in Exeter, runs the Exeter Dispatch, has been on that fire department, just a major player in fire departments in that area. He said, yeah, hop in, man. So myself and Rep Cotter, the chief drove us out into the heart of where this forest fire occurred. And I'll tell you right now, there are still areas that are smoking. And what you observe at first is you're going down a trail, and this is in the Nature Preserve, the Nature Conservancy Preserve, which is generally open to the public. And suddenly the atmosphere starts to change. You can smell that smoke as you're pulling in. And then as you enter into a deeper portion of the conservancy, you start to immediately see the ground and the trees are charred. He then took us further in to the exact site where they believe there was a campsite or something that sparked this fire. And I got a firsthand look at, 700 acres, weaving through back roads, and just the craziness of seeing the woods in this ashen, charred, just unrecognizable in moments type of state. It was semi-chilling. You know that feeling when you're like, you kind of want to say something, but you're not, your body, your jaw just doesn't quite react. Everything just is like, doesn't really fire on all cylinders. That's how I felt. And we're watching Rep Cotter and I in this fire vehicle as he's driving us through and explaining to us. It starts to click how fortunate we are that this thing didn't get completely and utterly out of control to the point where human life was lost, where livestock was lost, where homes were destroyed. Speaking of which, by the way, the EMA did a terrible job with comms on Friday. They told me that a house had been destroyed in the fire. We reported that over the radio. That was completely wrong. They didn't even know that there was a forest fire in Exeter. They're the spokesperson. I called them, and they didn't even know about it. I broke the news to the EMA comms person on Friday that there was a massive forest fire happening in Exeter. But anyway, back to the tour. You start to realize just how impressive the effort was by the fire departments, which, again, National Guard using the helicopters, I saw roadways where fire apparatus after fire apparatus was parked in residents' driveways so as to serve as essentially a barrier of last resort. If the fire crept further and into those homes, there were literally fire engines protecting every single home in that area, which had been evacuated. Frontline, many volunteer fire departments, frontline, ready to roll. I then saw how the geography of this area, which has the Queens River rolling through it, the fire originally jumped over the river because it was so tall that it was able to spread from tree to tree across the river. And it wasn't until it entered a swampy portion of this swath of woodland that it was remotely slowed. And it was clear from talking with folks that there were several moments where they thought that this thing was going to be completely out of control, no turning back type fire. And I learned of some of the gutsy decision-making that took place. Chief Cattell and his crew, and the technical knowledge and understanding that was used to fight that fire, to get ahead of it. The gutsy decisions that risked the lives of every single one of those firefighters that was on that front line, most of whom had never experienced this before, save for the other brush fires that have broken out in the state in training exercises. So a straight-up heroic effort, because this thing was so close to getting into that next level where it would have burned property, the frontline homes, it would have destroyed farms, livestock at stake, crossed into Shartner Farms. You know, Route 2, Shartner Farms, that area, starting to creep its way towards North Kingstown proper. Very, very fortunate. But here's the thing. About 4 years ago, now House Minority Leader Mike Chippendale, who, look, we've had our disagreements recently. You know, I kind of did a bit about him on PBS, and, you know, I find many of the Republican Party in general, in terms of Rhode Island right now, I find them to be so off track in accomplishing anything significant because they're caught up in culture war nonsense and have basically become entirely irrelevant, right? Culture war garbage. But a few years ago, before the pandemic, Mike Chippendale and I rode around. He drove me around his district. And we talked about this very thing. The condition of our forests is completely and utterly unacceptable. I saw it in his region, the northwest part of the state, where a healthy forest has a level of deforestation that takes place. It has a level, whether it's controlled burns, removing trees that are deceased or too close together. Remember how I mentioned that the fire was able to jump over the Queens River? That's because you have trees on top of each other that ought to be tamed, that ought to be looked at and possibly removed or addressed. Chippendale mentioned this years ago. It's been on my mind when I hike. I think about it all the time. We've got a gypsy moth problem right now. That's further deteriorating trees that are now just tinder boxes in the woods. That was the case in Exeter where this forest fire took place. Save for a private property, a very large private property, who had paid out of pocket for his own land to be deforested. That served as a natural barrier, along with the fields on that property, the cleared fields, which essentially is that deforestation. It serves as a natural barrier to contain the outbreak of this type of forest fire. Now, look, I learned that years ago, and not that many years ago, DEM had a very active forest maintenance, forest fire prevention unit that included folks who would literally be up in towers with binoculars during brush fire season, which is March through the mid-autumn here in Rhode Island, and would be looking for smoke, would be looking for signs of any type of outbreak. and would communicate with another tower. And they would use an analog map with a string to try to plot where the fire was. And there was a heavy presence. And as cell phones became prevalent, smartphones in particular, but people were then able to more and more often be able to directly communicate. Just the average person living in Green, Rhode Island, who happens to be out walking their dog or going to get their mail out of the mailbox, or is on a hike or something like that, whatever it is, they would be able to serve as an initial communication vehicle. And over time, that DEM Forest Division was reduced, ultimately merged with the Agriculture Division, and today there are just 4 forest fire experts in the state instead of this robust department. And that is massively significant. Chief Cattell talked about something called reflex time. In a place like Exeter, reflex time, which is the time it takes to respond to an incident. When you have volunteer firefighters who are at a day job and that call comes in, it used to be the horn. You guys ever remember that? There'd be a horn if you lived in southern Rhode Island or northwest Rhode Island. You definitely would hear these. All the volunteer village fire departments, a siren would blast, and that would be the bat signal, so to speak, for the volunteer fire department. Now it's a little different. Technology has evolved, of course. But it took 10, 15, 20 minutes just to get engines rolling after this fire was initially detected. So we have a breakdown in the maintenance of our forests. We have a breakdown in the department that ought to be in charge of this, oversee this scenario, and deploy resources. And we have a public that's generally speaking not aware of this, because the only person who's out there screaming about it is Republican Minority Leader Mike Chippendale in a party who's more concerned about culture war garbage and litter boxes that they think are being placed in some high school for kids wearing cat ears than actually sounding the alarm and not taken seriously because of that utter nonsense garbage. Which is a shame, because here's something they got right. He got right, at least. And it's just being completely lost. So what do? When I got back after that hour plus out in the woods, I thought, geez, this is a rare event. This is the biggest fire in the state's history. What's the likelihood it's going to happen again? But like the chief said in our ride, it's possible. Is it probable? I don't know. Is it possible? Absolutely. And we might not get so lucky next time. We had a potential utter disaster on our hands. And what happened is a shame. It's going to take up to 10 years for that forest to regrow. Now, it does create a scenario where that particular area will essentially has been deforested, and it may be stronger than ever when, in fact, it grows back. We've had a cycle of deforestation in Rhode Island. Think about southern Rhode Island. All the different phases. Most of southern Rhode Island was clear-cut. For, hey, let's be honest about it. In some cases, plantations, the Narragansett planters, slave-driven plantations. Yeah, in Rhode Island. Or just general farmland. And then it was reforested. And that cycle has happened time and time again, but not now. Now, I'm not saying that if we don't go and chop down 20% of the trees and get rid of all the additional dead trees in the forest, that we're going to have more forest fires this summer. But climate change is real. The housing crisis is forcing people to camp in the woods in large numbers. And that's where they live, perhaps totally off the grid. And guess what? It doesn't matter if you tell them it's a red flag forest fire warning event, and that by that their risk, the risk of problem from starting a fire is enormous, and that person needs that fire to keep warm. They need that fire to cook food. What do you think they're going to choose? So we're going to stay on top of this. We're going to keep following up. We're going to talk to DEM. We're going to talk to more fire departments. I think it's a major thing. I reached out to Chippendale. I say, hey, look, man, If you want to come on the show and talk about this, let's do it. He's not going to call me back. I mean, I ripped him. I did basically a skit about him on PBS on Lively Experiment a couple of weeks ago because I've grown tired of their nonsense long ago. But he's dead right on this. And credit where credit's due because no one else has been talking about it. And we got lucky this time. And we're lucky that we have the brave people that did what they did. The fire department in particular, the fire departments in particular, the National Guard. There were a lot of other unsung heroes, pool companies. There were 3 pool companies that provided their thousands of gallons of water. The chief estimated there was at least 250,000 gallons of water involved in the suppression of this fire. At least. Some of which came from the private sector. Those pool companies. And you saw a community come together. We saw a geofencing messaging system that, although flawed, did get the word out to many people to evacuate their area, their home. But we need to get on track at DEM in terms of getting this particular aspect of things. And again, I want to talk to them. I want to talk to their spokesperson. Who they're great. Yeah, I want to understand what the breakdown is from their standpoint, what kind of funding they need to do this better, why it's not there, or if I'm totally wrong here. I don't think I am. Not from what I heard today on the ground with the people who are there on the front lines. All right. A big week coming up this week here on the pod. Governor McKee will be on in studio later this week, one-on-one. We'll talk about his education plan. We'll probably talk about this. We'll probably talk about a lot of other things. Governor McKee making his, 7th, 8th appearance on the show. But they reached out. I was more than happy to do it. We got it scheduled, and we'll have a lot to discuss there. The episode I put up earlier today with Bella and Randy Noka, really important episode. We're going to strive to be a leading platform for the indigenous community in this state. I'm going to strive to do that, and there's an interesting situation playing out. And at the end of the day, the question is, who has the authority to make decisions about tribal matters anyway? The state or the federal government? So legislation that's being put in that can impact various tribes, whether recognized or unrecognized in the state, it may be moot anyway. So you can hear that on the podcast I put up today. Of course, last week, a lot of conversations around Congressional District 1 with Sabina Matos, the lieutenant governor. She was there today briefly. She came down briefly to the fire. Aaron Regenberg, all right, and Ian Donis, Publix Radio. He broke it down really well, that congressional race. So much more ahead, and as always, thank you for listening. If you're listening tonight, boy, have a great night. Sleep well. But for most of you, I'm sure you're hearing this on Tuesday morning or at some point this week. And I just wanted to hop on and share, I don't really have any prepared notes. What do we do to prevent another forest fire? There's a lot of things that are going to be way out of our control. But there are things we can do. There are definitely things that we can do to reduce the impact of these fires, the frequency of these fires, and in general, start to recognize that whatever you want to believe about climate change, I'm not here to debate you on that. In terms of origin, is it fossil fuel? Is it the cycle of the earth? I don't want to get into that. But if you're denying that it's happening, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. If that's really where if you are still in that place, I don't know what to tell you. But fortunately, I think most of us know. Things are shifting. And they're shifting fast. And we got to be ahead of the curve. Talk soon.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.